Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, to our annual IndyCar driver review. The first of two parts, as long-time listeners of the show will know. This is one of my favourite episodes of the year, maybe if not the favourite. It's up there with Christmas special for one of my favourite episodes of the year, to be honest. So I'm very much looking forward to this one. If you don't know how it works, we're going to be reviewing all 34 drivers and T-listing them, just having a quick chat on their seasons. Because we did that season review last week, obviously you didn't get a chance to touch on everybody across the course of the season. I think we noticed after last week's recording, Alexander Ross's name wasn't mentioned once. So he deserves the limelight, for example, because we didn't get a chance to think about him last week. So one of our favourite episodes of the year, and as me and Archie need multiple opinions because we will have disagreements across this, as we always do, we have got a third host in. So one of DIVEBOMB's writers, Evan, has very kindly joined us this week. Evan, welcome to the show. It's fantastic to have you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, excited to do some top-tier judging.
So let's start off with Marco Andretti, who was the unfortunate driver to finish last in the standings in 2025. His entire season lasted about 10 seconds, and maybe even that is a generous estimation after he was caught in an opening lap accident in the Indianapolis 500 with Ryan Hunter-Reay and Jack Harvey. I mean, it is all Marco Andretti puts into a season, but I think it's a fairly disappointing season for it to last that long. And obviously we can't forget he was involved in bump day as well, which is again pretty bad for the Andretti outfit. And just overall, pretty poor 500 from Marco. He's been struggling for a couple of years now, and this really wasn't his finest showing by any means.
Yeah, I think with Marco, it's a question now of when is enough. And I mean, he maintained, I think, that he will continue doing this for as long as he enjoys doing it. And I guess for as long as he wants to do it, he probably will be able to do it because the Andretti name carries that massive allure and you'll always get partners wanting to be involved. But yeah, it was another year of being a bit off the pace, and the crash was very similar to the one that actually ended his race last year as well. It all kind of felt like it happened in installments and happened in super slow motion. So yeah, it was a pretty miserable one for Marco, I must say.
Yeah, you said how it's about like if he's enjoying it. That didn't seem like a very enjoyable Indy 500 to me, getting mixed up in bump day and then out in the first corner. I didn't really see anything. Well, him excited the whole sort of 2 weeks. It was just constant, oh yeah, we're not very quick. And then, yeah, out. Yeah,
it didn't last very long. And he does seem to have some quite funny accents in the 500, doesn't he? Where he is squabbling all over the place. It looks like he's about to save it, but he crashes. And he gave me my favourite camera angle of the year, where they zoom out of turn 2, zoom back into turn 1, there's been a crash. Listeners of the show will know that is one of my favourite moments of the year. I forgot to mention it earlier, Archie, you've got a new setup this week. Fans of the show will love our alternate setups.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have many of them, but yeah, viewers will see. The only place I could record this week, because I'm on holiday, Brits will know Cornwall well. It's a lovely part of the country. But the only place I could record was in bed. So yeah, not my chosen background, but got some sailing boats on a picture above me. Got a view out over some naval boats. So yeah, that's me this week.
Anyway, here is the tier list. As you hopefully can all see, I have an opinion that Marco Andretti should go straight in F, because I don't think his year could have been really any worse if he tried.
Yeah, you can't get worse than what? One corner, if that.
Yeah.
That's your whole season.
And we'll quickly move on to Kyle Larson, obviously his second attempt at the double in 2025. Obviously, we've documented this very well on the podcast. And last year, he grabbed the headlines. He qualified 5th. He was showing a real calmness and just kind of sort of a no-fear approach to Indianapolis. It just like he sort of took it in a stride. But I thought this year was a little bit different. It felt like he was maybe unsettled with the car in comparison to previous years. He crashed at the open test pretty heavily, and then he crashed not to the same extent, but he crashed again on Fast Friday. He got away with it fairly unscathed in the end. And then obviously he qualified mid-pack, and then his race day wasn't superb either. Obviously made an error in turn 2 midway through, which sort of caused that multi-car pile-up. So I think the most disappointing thing from Larson, it was a very different affair to what we saw him do last year. Last year, as I said, it was just so calm. He took it in his stride so well, and it seemed like he was a bit of a natural at IMS. And he comes back this year and really didn't live up to the promise that he showed in year one. And obviously, I think a lot of people wanted to see how well Kyle Larson could do at the Indianapolis 500. And ultimately, it was a fairly underwhelming campaign this season.
I got the impression he didn't really enjoy it that much this year. Like, compared to the first year, as you say, Dan, it was all very natural and he was that usual kind of unflappable, calm self. But this year just felt a lot scrappier, I think is the word that I would use. It was a very, I thought, polished debut year is the way I would kind of describe it. And yeah, ultimately has the crash in testing, has the crash in practice. It did seem like, I know as much as he likes saying things aren't a big deal, I think he looked less comfortable in the hybrid powered car with that added weight. Yeah, it was average at best. Like, he didn't qualify particularly well. He didn't race particularly well. You didn't see much of him, and then obviously, yeah, ends race day with his own error and a third crash of, let's say, the month. Obviously, first crash came in April, but yeah, not the same pace, and just generally a bit scruffier. And it all felt like, okay, at least race day's not going to be stressful. And then rain suddenly becomes a factor again when that was not supposed to happen all month long. So yeah, seems like he's been a bit put off, I think, by the hassle of the double. He didn't seem keen on returning, did he? Until maybe he was done full-time racing in Cup.
Yeah, similar to what you said, Archie, he just never really seemed comfortable all month. Anytime we saw him in the car, he never really had the pace either, because the Arrow McLaren was a quick car throughout the whole of the month. And it was, to me at least, surprising that, based on what we've seen the previous year, that he didn't, not that he didn't take a step up, that he took a major step back.
Okay, so if we look at the list, I think we're probably looking at Larson the bottom two categories. I would personally say F, because it was a bit of a disaster all round, but others may have an alternate opinion.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I'm
Fine. I think we can agree he had a better campaign than Marco did, but it still wasn't anything to be particularly proud of this season. So we move on to Ryan Hunter-Reay, who had a very different month of May to Kyle Larson and Marco Andretti. Obviously, with Dry Weinberg Racing once again. I think that's the third consecutive year he's been with the team, and didn't qualify particularly spectacularly. I mean, the team all round didn't really have any pace at all. And then race day, he came out of absolutely nowhere. And suddenly we all thought Ryan Hunter-Reay was going to win a second Indianapolis 500. Obviously, we had Jack Harvey on a couple of weeks ago. We spoke to him about it, and he was like, I've got no idea where Ryan came from either. So we're not the only ones miffed about where Ryan Hunter-Reay somehow transferred to first with no explanation. But he did. And what a story would have been the part-time team winning the Indianapolis 500 with an Indy 500 veteran winning, but obviously wasn't to be. A mechanical failure of about 30 laps to go put an end to Ryan Hunter-Reay's victory hopes, which was a huge shame, because it would have been some sure if Ryan Hunter-Reay won the Indianapolis 500. I don't think there's really too much else to comment on this race, because I don't remember it, apart from the fact he just spawned in with 50 laps to go and went, oh my goodness, he could win the Indy 500.
I think it was pretty memorable, like regardless of how it ended, and ultimately, you could kind of say it was a botched strategy call, really, that denied him what would have been one of the all-time great Indy 500 wins. But if he hadn't have run that extra lap, which, I mean, he probably didn't need to have run that extra lap. I mean, that was obviously a mistake because it ran the car dry of fuel, and yeah, they couldn't get it restarted after that. But the mad thing was that he was on a better strategy. Again, somehow, even his teammate doesn't know, so how are we supposed to know? But he was on a better strategy than all of the race leaders, your Palou's, your Ericssons. If he would have, even if he'd stopped that lap before, he would have been in a better fuel situation and legitimately on for a second Indy 500 win for an Indy-only team. And I think it's super cool that an Indy-only team has shown the capability to produce that sort of performance, because it is part of the bedrock of the sport, and it's something that feels like it's diminished a little bit in some ways. But yeah, it was the ultimate heartbreak in the end, but I still think it was a pretty inspiring story. And the fact he was even in that position to possibly win the race in the final stint was a monumental achievement.
Yeah, I mean, Indianapolis is kind of like a game of luck and chance, and you, in that sense, you kind of make your own luck. And strategy is sort of the aim of the game in Indy, and the fact that he was able to be challenging for a victory out of what seemed like nothing is just sort of is crazy for a team that small to be up there fighting for the biggest prize in the sport. Is just, it was a brilliant story, but not everything can work out.
Well, do we remember Hunter Ray had that fire on carb day, so he had to replace his engine literally just before the race as well, which threw an extra caveat into that as well. And
replace his chassis.
Yeah,
that made it all the more impressive. Like the fact that, I suppose, A, that he ran that well, but B, and maybe foremost, the fact that the team put the car together, an Indy-only team who they aren't in the groove of having raced the rest of the season. They managed to put the car together in such a quality way that he was able to be competitive like that. He didn't have a competitive practice lap in that chassis because it happened on carb day. Like,
he got that 15-minute run out, didn't he? And that was
but I think that was only install laps, wasn't he? I think he could only run from pit entry to pit exit, or pit exit to pit entry. That was all he could do. So, that was unbelievable.
Okay, Ryan Hunter-Reay it's a difficult one to grade because his overall month was a bit strange, and he didn't qualify particularly well, but had quite a heroic race day. So I'd probably lean towards B, maybe B, C sort of range. Yeah,
I think it feels wrong to put an Indy only effort unless they were to win in A.
Yes, I agree with that.
So B sounds good.
B sounds good. Are we sure? He had a poor qualifying. I don't know.
I would be inclined to say C, given he had an amazing small part of the race, but again, he didn't finish.
He did luck into
not great
strategy, as we have.
You guys are
not great qualifying.
We have to save the top spot.
Okay, well, I'm outnumbered. I'd go B, but I'm outnumbered.
We'll go C. He might go top of C. We might change it over time, but we will go on to his Dry and Reinbold Racing teammate Jack Harvey, obviously good friend of the show. His primary commitment, as we know, was reporting for Fox Sports this year, but did the Indianapolis 500 as a one-off entry. Really not really much to say about Jack Harvey's race. He qualified very similarly to Hunter Ray. He led a couple of laps just being off strategy at times. But again, when you're a part-time team and maybe you don't have the resources of other teams, you do sort of have to just go for a little bit, maybe be a bit more adventurous, especially when you start around the back of the field. Harvey did end up finishing 19th at the end, a couple of laps down.
It's a funny one. I think he noted it when we spoke to him that essentially he pretty much had the same month as Hunter Ray. Practice sessions, qualifying, they were kind of ranking in the same sort of position. I think they qualified side by side pretty much. Which I guess is, again, probably speaks to Dry and Reinbold Racing built two pretty solid cars that were nice consistency between the two of them. So they did a good job as they always tend to, even though they didn't have the speed, obviously, as Hunter Ray the year before getting into the Fast 12, which was particularly impressive. I did like Harvey's approach of just making sure he enjoyed the month, because obviously he's out of a full-time ride, and he spoke to us about the fact that he really wanted to appreciate it and let everything sink in. And I think it did seem to pay off. He seemed to perform decently well. It wasn't like it was a disastrous month and he was fighting to be in the field, what have you. And he also led laps off strategy, but ultimately got that pit speed penalty, which undid his race. But yeah, I don't know what to say, really. Kind of tracking to be the same as Hunter Ray, and then the strategy happened and Hunter Ray soared into the lead.
I think that's kind of partly one of the most impressive parts about his whole Indy 500 experience, though. The fact that he was doing it sort of to show what he can do, and he put it incredibly close to what Hunter Ray could do, and we all know how good he is at Indianapolis. So it's just, I think that has to be sort of the comparative part, especially when they're the only two people on the team. It's you have to sort of compare what he was doing, and I think he did a pretty good job in that sense.
Okay, I feel like he sort of really has to go in D, doesn't he?
Yeah.
based on our current ranking. So that's a nice and easy one. We'll move on to Ed Carpenter next. Obviously, his first year being an Indy 500 only driver. He's obviously done all the ovals in previous seasons. Qualified 14th, finished 50th. I think now that many was a lap down. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really remember anything from Ed's race apart from the 3 ECR cars running up front at one point of strategy towards the start of the race. That's pretty much all I can tell you.
Yeah, that's all I can say as well. Like, I think he qualified between his two teammates, like decent, but yeah, not much to say. He did a good job as Rossi's strategist in the last few races. That's probably the most I can say about him, to be honest, this year.
Sorry, Ed Carpenter fans, we don't really have much for you at all here. I think he probably had a better month than Harvey in the scheme of things, judging by where he finished. So,
Would that go top of D then?
top of D, I think, is fair. Helio Castro Neves is next up, and it's very similar to Red Carpenter. I unfortunately don't think I could tell you very much about Helio's month, to be completely honest with you. Obviously won the Indy 500 4 years ago, and there's been the drive for 5 ever since, but Helio's never really been competitive ever since that point, which is a huge shame because I'm sure many people do want to see him be competitive at an Indianapolis 500. Qualified 22nd and finished 10th in the end. And again, I don't think I could really tell you anything about Helio's race.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the only reason he actually finished 10th was because of the penalties. I guess he was 12th or 13th without that. So,
and that goes to all the previous drivers as well, to make clear.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think it was pretty reminiscent of quite a few of his recent Indy efforts where he's kind of floating around the mid-pack. He's not uncompetitive yet. Did he? He turned 50, did he? I'm pretty sure he turned 50.
He is now 50.
Maybe, it might even have been during May that he turned 50.
That in itself is impressive. Just being able to do the Indianapolis 500 at 50?
Yeah, exactly. And be credited with a top 10 finish as well.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, I don't know. Like, qualifying at times, I recall it being pretty precarious. I think he was pretty tetchy after his first run, actually. It ended up being fine. But yeah, the race, he made decent progress. Like, there was quite a lot of attrition. So, yeah, not masses to add. It's very, very carpentery.
Okay, I mean, he's probably either one above or one below Ed Carpenter in D tier. Had a better finish, so I'd be inclined to say probably above.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
But again, nothing too exciting there. So you'll be glad to know we'll end off on the Indy 500 drivers with Takuma Sato, who actually had a very strong month. My favourite statistic of the year is he had the best qualifying average of any driver with his P2 qualifying, and obviously that was a pretty heroic one. Not as quite as heroic as the pole sitter, but heroic one nonetheless. Obviously Sato ran very competitively. I mean, he obviously got the lead in the early stages. He led the most laps of anybody at the 500. He looked very quick all month, particularly in comparison to his teammates. And obviously he had, it was an issue in pit road, wasn't it, which sort of took Sato out of contention in one of the opening pit stop phases, which was a shame because he looked a real contender for victory. He had a good race car and he qualified very well. And I know obviously Sato's been back at RLL for 2 seasons now and he's been very impressive in both of them, and there was actually another really strong 500 run for Taku. Just a shame a small little error really cost him hugely.
Yeah, I would describe it as an extremely topsy-turvy and probably at times extremely impressive 500 campaign, because obviously he came out the blocks with a super fast car in the open test and had a pretty massive crash which essentially undid all of that. And I think his team, obviously being a one-off team at RLL in that 4th entry, put in a pretty heroic recovery and building up that car in, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, essentially, work that they would usually do in an entire year to get it back to what felt like the same sort of competitiveness. And he caps off that recovery obviously by putting the car on the front row, which I thought was probably one of the stories of the year, to be quite honest. That recovery drive, or that recovery effort from the team, it was extremely impressive. And I mean, he dominated that early part of the race as well before. I think he went deep in his pit stall was the issue. So I know we had a few cars that were having braking issues. I don't know whether it was his error or not. But yeah, like he felt like he possibly had the strongest car in the field and was on the brink of a 3rd 500. I think regardless, it was an impressive effort from a team that otherwise, especially, I mean, you look at the wider season, have been pretty ailing on ovals. And yeah, he's another driver that's getting on for 50 years old. So to put in such a performance is pretty sensational stuff. And yeah, front row, still ended up in the top 10. I think he may have finished just outside before the penalties. Is pretty impressive, but it's one that I kind of look at it and think, like, what could have been?
Yeah. I mean, when you say compare him to how the rest of his teammates performed for the whole of the season on ovals, especially in the month of May, it was like night and day. And for like a driver doing a one-off race, you wouldn't really expect that. Again, yeah, he's a 2-time 500 winner, so maybe you would. I think it was probably one of his best 500s that he's had, which is quite bizarre to think. And the pace was completely unexpected. So even though the result wasn't quite there, I think it was definitely good. And another reason that I hope we'll be seeing him again next year.
So I think for me, I think Sato's a fairly easy B in my mind.
Yeah, he didn't make it easy for himself.
He never does he? He doesn't do things the simple way just to Kuma Sato, obviously.
Yeah, I would do. I think the recovery effort from the team combined with obviously putting it on the front row and the fact he was so strong in the race and still recovered for a top 10.
As I say, you have to watch the qualifying rounds behind your sofa, otherwise you're not doing it the proper way when watching Takuma Sato. But we'll now move on to the full-time drivers of 2025. We'll start with one of our very close friends of the show in Jacob Abel. Obviously, his rookie season, but it really was a very, very difficult rookie season for Jacob Abel. See, that 51 entry has been a bit of a difficult entry in recent seasons for multiple different reasons. And first wave was qualifying, really struggled there, an average of 25th across the course of the year, which really is a bit disappointing. Average finish ended up being 23rd across the course of the season, and plenty of mechanical issues and was obviously involved in a few crashes as well, such as Iowa and Toronto. And just really struggled for pace throughout the entirety of the year. I mean, we saw on occasions, Rinus VK is much more experienced teammate struggling for pace, particularly on the ovals. And on the face of it, Abel's season was poor, and we can't really go around saying he did have a good season. But there was as I said, there was a distinct lack of pace at times. It felt like a baptism of fire a lot of times, and there was a lot of factors that went outside of his control, which lost him a lot of points. But nonetheless, I still think it was a very difficult year, a very difficult learning year for him, and remains to be seen if we'll be back in any capacity next year. But just a very, very tough rookie season in pretty much every way you can imagine.
Yeah, I feel for him. Like, he's living out what should have been a dream, but it really turned into a nightmare for most of it. And you know, he's a kid who's grown up watching IndyCar, attending Indy 500s, and I mean, he didn't even make the Indy 500, which was obviously pretty heartbreaking for a rookie. Like I say, aside from occasional flurries, it was an uncompetitive year, but those occasional flurries were like very occasional. Which oval was it? Was it one of the
Iowa 2? He finished 11th.
Yeah. So I mean, that was the only real high point. He was in the top 20 twice in races, and I mean, as you say, Dan, with his qualifying average, he never really had the outright pace. He was pretty much always on the final 2 rows in qualifying, and yeah, I mean, Indy looked good to start with. Like, he was relatively competitive, but it felt like him and VK as well. It was very mysterious for Coyne. Just lost pace as the month kind of went on, and elsewhere in the season, really, he was usually finishing off the lead lap. I don't think the execution was there. I mean, I'd like to hear his side of the story, to be honest, because I feel like there was so much misfortune, quite a lot of instability in the team as well, with engineering reshuffles throughout the year. And I can imagine that combined with obviously the mechanicals, it makes it hard to get into much of a rhythm. And yeah, I'd be intrigued to see a second year, because with rookies, you can't always judge them off their first season. There can be slow starters, and obviously that second Coyne car has been pretty uncompetitive and has been known for occasional blunders, what have you, over recent years. So it's hard to come to a definitive conclusion on Abel as an IndyCar driver, but you have to judge the results that we have, and he was, unfortunately, off the back of this year, justifiably last in points. But looking at the bigger picture, Indy Next runner-up last year, it's a guy who's no slouch. So I hope he gets a chance to try and redeem himself.
Yeah, going into this year, I can't say it was what I was expecting to happen to him, like what has happened to him, and you do have to really sort of feel for him because, again, he's doing what he's always dreamed of doing, going up to the big stage, and he's been put in the worst possible situation in the most uncompetitive car on the grid with a very quite competitive teammate, which just makes him look even worse in comparison. Granted, he didn't help himself with a lot of rookie mistakes, which will happen, but too many of those mistakes, I think.
So Abel's best qualifying was in 20th, which is pretty disappointing there, and he had the lowest finishing average of any full-timer across the course of the season by some margin. So if we're looking at the tier list, I really think it's got to be an F, unfortunately. Jacob is a very good friend of the show, but there was just a clear struggle and a clear lack of pace, which means I think it's difficult to put him any higher, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I will say reluctant, yes. And I'm not going to look at you do it because it pains me.
Yes, Jacob is a good friend of the show, and we do wish him the best. And hopefully we'll see him back next season because, as we said, I don't think this was a very representative year in many ways. And it'd be good to see him get a year in slightly more competitive machinery with a more stable outfit and hopefully less misfortune, because there was times he was just having misfortune, but nobody would have realised it because he was unfortunately at the back. But we'll move on to Devlin DiFrancesco. Archie, I'll let you lead for this one.
I mean, the results say everything you need to know. Like, he's
that was
now
a long,
yeah, he's now at only over 50 IndyCar races, and he's still not finished inside the top 10. I think I'm right in saying he finished only once inside the top 15 all season this year, and that was his 11th place finish at the Indy 500. And even then, he was promoted, I think, 3 positions by penalties, at least 2 positions. I can't exactly remember the order before the penalties. Dan is gesturing to say it was 3 positions. And weirdly, like, it was actually a mildly encouraging start to the year. I know Graham Rahal was pretty effervescent in his praise of Dev, and especially on the content days, the media days at the start of the year, saying that immediately when Dev signed for the team, he picked up the phone and messaged Graham asking for his advice on certain things that he felt he needed to improve on from his 2 years he'd had with Andretti. Obviously, had the year out in 24, but as the year went on, he seemed to spiral a bit. He wasn't executing on Sundays, and I think one thing that Graham said was going wrong, or this was his judgment of it, was that DiFrancesco was actually putting too much pressure on himself. And Sundays, I mean, outlined by the solitary top 15 finish, were pretty awful. And like, he would occasionally have a better qualifying session where he'd maybe out-qualify his teammates. I know we had another 5th place Indy GP, and then he kind of falls down the order. But yeah, I think this is a team that has some big problems still on ovals. And we'll probably touch on that later with the biggest issue of all on ovals being Graham Rahal's performance. But race day, everywhere, really, they struggle for execution. And I think DiFrancesco, just 3 years in IndyCar now, just doesn't seem like he's nailed it on a Sunday. And there's nothing to show that he's any better off for having that kind of sabbatical than when he was unfortunately pretty uncompetitive as well in that 4th Andretti car.
Yeah, I mean, you said the Indy GP was sort of, I guess, the main highlight of the year, but even then, just completely faded in the entire race. And I think that kind of doesn't really sum up his season. I think the latter part of the race sums up his season. And I don't know, Rahal, the team hasn't been a very quick team throughout most of the year, but then comparing to his teammates and what they have been able to do, I don't know, he's not had the highs.
Yeah, I mean, we got the annual Devlin DiFrancesco good qualifying Indianapolis road course, and that was pretty much the annual highlight, as it always is. But his average finish was outside the 20s, which is pretty poor. The one thing I will say is towards the end of the year, he was actually the quickest on ovals, but with a rookie teammate, and Graham Rahal, as we said many a time, is a bit of a moving chicane there was currently. I don't really think you can hold much of an achievement there. He obviously had 2 crashes on ovals in both Gateway and Iowa pretty embarrassingly early on in the race, which was not good for somebody of his experience. And there wasn't, as you said, the progress at all, and he hasn't really made any progress since his rookie season. And on it, obviously, he comes in with a lot of funding now, and it's still TBD of what his future is at the team.
I think the two things that define Devon DiFrancesco's IndyCar career are the Indy GP, where even if he qualifies well, did he finish on the lead lap this time? I know last time he qualified fifth and had the heroic first lap.
Not sure he did.
Just kind of.
Oh no, he might have done because there was that late caution.
Okay. But just tumbling down the oh god, that was during the phase where we finally ended the cautions, wasn't it, in the GP?
Yes.
But yeah, like it's just kind of the evidence of his Sundays being a real struggle, even if there are like hints of pace. But also another thing that kind of sums up his IndyCar career is the crash before the green flag with Scott McLaughlin at Thermal, which was pretty nuts, to be honest. That was crazy.
And then we had through that phase, he was getting through a bust up with everyone. He had that bust up with McLaughlin at Thermal, then he had a bust up with Rosenquist at Long Beach afterwards, didn't he? So
that
was a weird phase.
Because I think the McLaughlin beef was reignited in was it Portland?
Quite possibly. And then obviously he crashed into McLaughlin at Iowa as well, didn't he? So that was an ongoing feud.
I think that's a bit harsh to say he crashed and McLaughlin could have nowhere.
Well, he crashed into McLaughlin, yes.
Yeah.
Well, Portland, it almost went a bit NASCAR style. They were getting all up in each other's faces at one point. It was getting a bit interesting.
Yeah. At least he created one of the most viral moments of the year.
Unfortunately, I think we're probably looking at F or a D, to be honest. I'm impartial to which one we go for.
Oh, it's got to be
think it's AF.
F. Let's go F above Abel. He got significantly more points than Abel, but yeah, a disastrous campaign really for Devon DiFrancesco. Now, we'll move on to another good friend of the show, Stingray Robb, obviously a third-year driver. Evan, you can lead us off for this one.
I think overall more positive than what we've seen from him before, especially pace-wise. Still making mistakes that I guess have sort of come out throughout his career, but I think the pace has definitely been better in that sense.
I mean, Robb's year was really highlighted with a second career top 10 finish, which he got on the streets of Long Beach. Obviously, was really on the right strategy there and elevated him to a top 10 finish. But I still don't think there is the progress from Robb year on year that really should be expected. His average qualifying was 22nd, only Abel with a worse average. I mean, there were some better qualifying results, but again, the best was only 17th across the course of the year, which he achieved at both Indianapolis events. And then average finish was just under the 20s. Again, we saw maybe too few many mistakes from Robb. Crashed at the second Iowa race. He obviously had a crash at Road America as well. It was obviously caught up in last incident in Indianapolis 500. Maybe not as many crashes we've seen in other years, but there still seems to be a general lack of progression year on year from Robb. Again, encouraging results like Long Beach, and there were some better finishes towards the end of the year. But as I said, it's a third-year driver now who's been in 3 different teams in 3 different years, and we're running out of excuses now, really, and we're not really seeing a development from Robb each year that I think we'd like to see at this stage of his IndyCar career.
I do believe rumours are linking him to stay with Juncos for next year as well.
He was confirmed this way. He was on a multi-year deal, but the team basically reiterated, as well as Stingray, reiterated that contract is still valid for 2026. So expect him to stay at Juncos for next season. We obviously are unsure on what's going to happen for the sister seat.
I do wonder whether, I don't know, another year in the same team for the first time will, I don't know, do him good, and sort of that stability will maybe help him focus on other parts of his race pace, I guess, and just progress further.
Yeah, I'd echo that point. It was a tweet from Stingray himself saying that he is returning. It was weirdly similar to some of the tweets we've had from drivers saying that they're returning to teams and they don't end up returning to teams. But I think for his sake, I do hope he gets that continuity, because a third year with a third different team, and just on the point of it doesn't feel like he's making much progress. I think it probably is quite difficult to make masses of progress when you do have that sort of instability. He's obviously gone from that pretty uncompetitive coin entry to a Foyt team that he probably should have been more competitive, and to a Juncos team who, quite frankly, were I mean, it's hard to judge them, obviously, without someone like in previous years, a Grosjean or an Iowa, who were particularly good road course, street course racers, like Renault. I know Daly's not a slouch, but he's not known for that. But their road and street course package didn't seem particularly good this year. I think the marker for Rob is, and okay, he's coming up against an elite oval driver in terms of Connor Daly, but he was pretty far off his teammate on those ovals. So yeah, like I think there was some better days, but the better days are still around the mid-teens. He was still in the top 15 3 times, still 10 race results in the 20s. Yeah, it isn't the progress you'd hope for a third-year driver, but there is the caveat, obviously, of not having the continuity that hopefully if all aligns and the contract is honoured as you would expect it to be, then he can have that bit of continuity next year. But if next year is unsuccessful, then you probably have to question what his future may be. It feels like crunch time. Obviously, he brings money, but there's yet to be proof of any massive performance upside, I would say.
Him and Daly actually have an identical average on road and street course finishes this season of 19th to all the decimal points. Now, if we look at the list, where does Stingray Rob go? I think we're probably looking D or F in this case.
I'd be willing to say D, like bottom end of D tier for that.
Yeah, I'd say low. I'd go low end of D.
Perfect. Yeah, I think he had a better year than Di Francesco. Obviously, he had some top tens, as we said, and qualified. Maybe slightly better than Di Francesco did as well. Okay, let's go on to Robert Schwartzman of Prema Racing. Also, touching on people's future, there was a rumour going around which we shared that he was quite unhappy in IndyCar. He put out a statement next year saying actually how pleased he was in the series. So intentions maybe us shifting towards him staying next year, but again a bit TBD on that. But there was just a statement last week from Schwartzman sort of reaffirming the fact that he does really enjoy IndyCar racing. So thought that was worth bringing up before we touch on the season.
A lot of this reporting had come from Marshall Pruitt, and I would just say, regardless of a driver putting out a statement, I don't think it necessarily guarantees. You've got to believe what comes from the horse's mouth, and that's coming from Schwartzman. But I don't think it necessarily guarantees that there's not truth in reporting, because someone like Marshall Pruitt will not have reported something like that without good sourcing. That's my point on that.
Let's look at Schwartzman's season as a whole. It will obviously be mostly remembered for his sensational pole at the Indianapolis 500 in one of the greatest Indianapolis shocks that we've had in recent seasons. But I feel like outside of that, it was actually a pretty underwhelming season for Schwartzman. It was obviously his rookie year, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt in many ways. But it was odd in many ways. I mean, his qualifying on road and street courses was actually 23rd, which is not very good at all, really. His overall qualifying was obviously a bit more inflated because of the 500, so you're now looking at an average of 20th place. I feel like on road street courses, he was actually quite underwhelming. Had an overall finish on road street courses, an average of 20th, which again is pretty disappointing. I feel like we never really saw too much from Schwartzman, which in some ways is a good thing. He wasn't making many errors. The main one that springs to mind is obviously he had that early crash at Road America, but he didn't make many other errors outside that, which you do have to give him credit to as a rookie who had a lot of learning to do. Obviously, ended up getting 2 top 10s at both Iowa and Gateway, but even then maybe they weren't maximised, but that wasn't fully his fault in those occasions. And was run on for a top 10 in Nashville until the freeway Rookie of the Year was. So it was an interesting complex, but Schwartzman seems like pretty comfortable on ovals considering his experience, but really didn't adapt to road and street courses particularly well, which was kind of the exact opposite of what we were expecting from him. And I feel like he wasn't miles off Ilott at the start of the season, but Ilott sort of really came into his own in the latter stages. So it was a very mixed bag season, but obviously, as I said, be remembered for that epic Indianapolis 500 pole run, which is still an amazing story to stay. We touched on it last week, so we won't beat the horse again. But just a bit of a strange year, I think, for Schwartzman in many ways.
Yeah, I think like my overriding point was exactly what you mentioned, that he probably was one of the more anonymous drivers in the field, obviously aside from the obvious at the 500. And yeah, it probably does speak to the fact he wasn't making many like glaring rookie errors. Road America was also the one that sprang to mind for me. Obviously, I think he attributed the pit lane issue at Indy to a braking problem, actually. It was a shame how that obviously all came undone. But yeah, it was a tough start to his life in IndyCar. He had a lot of issues and missed a heck of a lot of track time. I mean, the fire at Thermal's the one that really stands out to me. Even I think St. Pete in the opening weekend, he was limited in terms of track time. So he was on the back foot from quite early on those road and street courses. So yeah, it was surprising, and it was quite weird that he stood out most on the ovals, and he did in that regard really outshine Ilott in that early part of the season. But Ilott kind of came into his own as the year went on. Some real peaks in those closing few rounds for Ilott. I guess you'll never be able to take the 500 off Schwartzman. 43 years since a rookie driver was on pole. 42 years since a rookie team was on pole. This was a rookie driver team combination, which was obviously just astonishing. But yeah, it just never seemed like Schwartzman found that comfort level on the types of track that you would have expected to be most familiar to him. And I mean, the rookie of the year deal, I mean, it was an unforgivable lapse really in that final, the closing laps while he was running. I think he was running 8th or 9th, and Nashville was tracking to wrap up the rookie of the year when he made that pretty silly block. So yeah, whether we see him back or not, I mean, I guess you've got to take his statement for what he says.
It was a really weird season. We've all said, but I don't think anyone expected him to be as competitive on the ovals as he actually was. And just the sort of disparity between that and the road courses was quite shocking. And the fact that he threw away the Rookie of the Year literally when he had it in his grasp, I think is probably one of the biggest bottles of the whole year, honestly, because that's something like that when you don't have to even make the move, did not have to make the block. He could have easily lost the position and just had another top 10 and Rookie of the Year. And that would look amazing on just looking at it at the end of the year for his chances of keeping his seat for next year.
Okay, looking at the tier list, my preference would be top of D.
Yeah. For now, yeah. I mean, he'll probably tumble down D, to be honest. But yeah, for now.
Current top of D, we'll say for the minute. So let's move on to his Rookie of the Year rival, one of our unofficial third hosts of the show, Louis Foster. Archie, you take us away.
Yeah, it was a funny old year. Like, I felt like he was ultimately limited by some of the team's wider struggles. I know that he mentioned to us when we spoke to him, I guess it was around the midpoint of the season, that Sundays have been the issue, and part of that is obviously him learning as a rookie, but part of it also was that the team were pretty quick on quite a frequent basis on Saturdays in qualifying, and things just kept going wrong in races, whether it was strategy, whether it was the car setup. They just didn't seem to have much pace. Like, I think his qualifying pace was, or just his pace in general, was clear in qualifying on particularly the road courses. Obviously, that stat he kept regurgitating throughout the year. He was 6 from 6 transferring to the Fast 12 on road courses. Obviously, didn't make it in Portland, but that was impressive. I think ultimately the headline of his season is Road America getting that pole. Also, he was third for the Indy GP, but I think pole as a rookie on the longest road course on the calendar, that was a pretty impressive achievement, I thought. And obviously Schwartzman's Indy 500 pole takes the limelight. But yeah, 2 rookie poles this year was pretty cool. I think the ovals, I guess race day in general, I mean, Foster didn't have a top 10 finish. The ovals, I mean, he was relatively competitive on the ovals, I thought. It wasn't like ultimately Rahal, who was struggling massively. Foster was generally quicker than his more experienced teammates, despite the struggles that team have had on the short ovals. I thought he did a decent job. And I come away from the year thinking the raw materials and the foundations are there. He ultimately still comes away with Rookie of the Year because of Schwartzman's moment. We didn't quite see the peaks of, obviously, his Indy Next Championship winning campaign. But as I said earlier, rookie years can be pretty variable. Look at Kyle Kirkwood at Foyt, and then he goes to Andretti the following year and wins races. So, yeah, you can't really judge the lows. I think you've just got to take the highs and feel pretty encouraged with what Foster did.
I think it was pretty unfortunate, just the way that Rahal, Lemon, and Lanigan, they were really quite at their best during the start of the season, and that's when he was sort of still struggling to adapt, especially in the tyre wear aspect of things, and you could really see that. I think the Indy GP was probably the clearest showing of that. And the first stint where he just dropped like a stone through the field, where maybe his teammates who also had a quick car weren't sort of falling off as far. I think later in the year, I think he definitely, throughout the season, improved on the tyre wear aspect. I think he sort of learned how to manage his race. And even though, yeah, he got his pole at Road America, I think that was probably his most convincing all-round performance, because he got a bit unlucky on strategy, if I remember correctly, and he still managed to almost climb back up into the top 10. So I don't know. I think the pace is clearly there. The qualifying was incredibly impressive for a rookie in a team that's quite, again, we say the word unstable quite a lot, but there's quite a lot going on in that team at the moment, trying to figure out how, especially on ovals, how they're so slow. And I think that's probably taking away somewhat from their road course performances, because they can't focus as much on development for that as well. I think Rookie of the Year, if you had to say throughout the season who deserved it more, Schwartzman or Foster, I think Foster was probably the more impressive of the two over the whole season.
I think Foster similar to Shortford did make loads of mistakes. The only one that again really springs to mind is that crash at Gateway, which caused him a bigger accident with Newgarden. He did make plenty of errors, and his qualifying average was significantly better than both of his teammates, which I think is something to take away from the year. But again, he's one of only 3 drivers who didn't get a top 10 finish throughout the course of the season. So there's plenty of different ways of looking at it, but the team really did quite clearly struggle in execution on all 3 cars, but I sort of delved into that a little bit last week, and I don't need to really repeat that. So I think the results maybe don't speak for how good of a season he has had, and the team did let him down in several ways. And I think that's a shame, because I think he's done enough to show what he can do, but year 2 we need to see a step up, and that will come in execution, because stuff like tyre management I think was a big problem at the start of the year. Looking at the tier list, I think we're probably looking high D, low C again, really.
Yeah, I'd be happier putting him in lower C. But
I would as well.
Okay, let's go on to another friend of the show, Nolan Siegel. Evan, you take us away from Nolan Siegel's season.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't the greatest if you look at it just based on results, but I feel really bad for him. He's been put in one of the best teams on the grid, but that seat, that drive has been so sort of hotly contested and so, I don't know, under threat. I feel like he's been driving as if he has to perform, otherwise he's going to lose his seat, which I think isn't the best way to sort of, I don't know, get a young driver to perform, because he is young and he's going to make mistakes, which he has quite a lot so far this season, which, especially in the latter part, was definitely, I think, just after he started crashing, I think from there it kind of just spiraled out of control. The pace that he had early in the season, he got top 10 in Alabama, that was pretty good at Barber. And then I think he had quite a good weekend at Road America. When I was doing sort of my takeaways from that weekend, it was sort of him and Kevin Simpson really sort of looked like they'd made a sort of step up that weekend and showed that they had quite good pace. And at times he did have quite good pace. And I think he outqualified his teammates a couple of times, especially, Mid-Ohio was quite a good qualifying for him. But I don't know. I'm glad that he's getting another year, because I feel there's been so much sort of uncertainty over the Arrow McLaren seat, and I think those 3 drivers, all of them are quite young, all of them are fairly talented. So if there's not sort of the constant change and scrap to know whether they're going to still be in that seat, the next race, it's like, I think overall not a great season, but there's highlights, I think, for next year.
Siegel's qualifying wasn't too bad. Actually qualifying on top 12 on 7 occasions, which translated into a top 6 qualifying on 3 occasions. This was obviously sort of year 1.5, effectively got half a season in running last year. There was quite a lot of errors as we to, particularly on ovals. Milwaukee opening lap crash. Obviously crashed at Iowa, which put him out the second race. Obviously crashed at the Indianapolis 500 later as well, which we've mentioned really cost him. And the way I see it is I don't think he justified McLaren's knee-jerk reaction to put him in for Théo Pourchaire midway through last season as this really promising young talent that would take to IndyCar by storm, because he hasn't really. I think McLaren took a real step up in performance, but I don't think Siegel wasn't miles above a Louis Foster, for example, who's in a worse outfit and has had half a season's less experience, is maybe the way I'd put it there. Siegel's average finishing position was an 18th, which was actually behind Foster's, for example. And I feel like there were glimmers, particularly in qualifying, but execution wasn't really always there. And I feel there is such a disparity between him and the other 2 teammates that he has that it's difficult to really say that it's been a successful year anyway. As I said earlier in other podcasts, that I do think he deserves another year because in some ways this was his rookie season, but he hasn't shown enough for me to see him as any competitive option for Aaron McLaren in the future, because they're building a very strong team, but I just don't see how Siegel currently is part of that.
I thought it was interesting bringing up Pourchaire, and I'm just wondering, you guys, do you think he would have done better if he got the full seat for the full season? Because I definitely do.
I think I saw enough from Pourchaire to say that I think with a year's experience, he would have been in a good position. I'm not sure on ovals, but at least on road street courses, I think he would have been not miles off O'Ward and Lundgaard.
I mean, I agree, because I mean, even the races we saw from Pourchaire was pretty quick. I know Detroit was the one that really stood out as being particularly impressive. So he seemed to take to it more so than Siegel did, and I guess that's natural. I mean, he's an F2 champion. He had more experience. Siegel's a particularly young guy with not as much experience, although obviously has done a lot of stuff in the sports car realm. I think he was actually racing at Silverstone this weekend, which was quite cool. Yeah, I don't want to kind of jump to big final conclusions on him, given it was at the end of the day his first full year, but I thought it was a disappointing end to the year in particular. I mean, he didn't finish better than 16th in the final 6 races, and I don't think he kicked on as you kind of would have hoped at the tracks that he'd already visited in his kind of pretty brief IndyCar career in that first part season in 24. I think there were glimmers throughout the year where he was competitive with his teammates. Obviously, qualifying 4th at Mid-Ohio, as you mentioned, Evan, was kind of the big high point, and there were occasional other moments. Like, I don't think his qualifying was bad, as Dan kind of outlined, but I think those shoots of pace were a bit too sporadic. And yeah, in a season where Aaron McLaren really kicked on with only 2 top 10 finishes, he did lag behind his teammates, who, I mean, shared a combined 12 podiums at 6 apiece. So I don't expect him to be as competitive as Lundgaard and O'Ward, with a lot more experience and a lot more pedigree, but I think you've got to hope, especially going into next year, he's more, not even on a par, but just closer to them on a more regular basis. Like, he had 11 results, 16th or worse, from 16 rounds as well, obviously having missed that one Iowa race. And I think he does have to cut out those errors, like it particularly seeming to be like he made quite a lot of errors late in races. I don't know why, like concentration going as races progress, like avoidable errors like the crash on the final lap at Indy where gets down low. It's an error that he's not made the rest of the month, and he does it on the 200th lap of the 500 miles. So yeah, I think he just needs to polish up a bit, just kind of knit everything together in a way that he hasn't. And I think the potential that we've seen in little parts needs to come out more consistently next year. Now he is more settled in that team.
Okay, so I think it really has got to be D-tiered because it was a disappointing year. It's just, I guess, above Schwartzman.
I would do that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's move on to another friend of the show, our 4th in a row, Callum Eilert. And as I said in the Schwartzman segment, it's a bit of a strange year for Ilott because it felt like him and Prema were quite underwhelming at the start, but towards the end of the season, Ilott really gained some momentum. And he ended up having 4 top 9 finishes in the final 5 races, which was a pretty good ending to the year after what had been a pretty difficult year otherwise. I mean, I do remember his Iowa weekend being particularly messy because he crashed out in both races whilst trying to be a hero on the high line, which was pretty funny. And he was obviously in a bit of a difficult position for the team because he was trying to build Prema in a much different way to how he built Juncos. While Schwartzman didn't really have any experience leaning, whilst Ilott did. So I guess from a driver's perspective, he was quite relied on. His qualifying average was quite a bit better than Schwartzman's. Ended up with 3 fast 12 appearances, which I thought was actually not too bad. And as I said, it took him a while, but once him and Prema got more comfortable, the pace was certainly there. And I think that is real encouragement because prior to those sort of last 5 races, it looked like a pretty disastrous season for Prema. But I think Ilott really stepped it up in the last few races and showed why a few years ago he was one of the hottest property in the series. So a lot of credit to Ilott for sort of overcoming that adversity in the last couple of rounds. And it's clear that Prema made progress with his direction, which is good to see. Just a shame it sort of took them so long to do it. But, if they are back next year, which everything points to them being so, I think we will see a big step up from them in performance in year 2.
I mean, it was always going to be that way. I know they're obviously a high-quality outfit and very proven, but it was always going to be a process. And, I mean, obviously the Indy 500 game is a massive shock. But, I mean, it wasn't until Road America, which was round 9 of the season, that I actually logged a top 15 finish. And I think it was after that point that, as you kind of mentioned, he did really remind people why he was so highly touted after, that rather unceremonious exit from Juncos Hollinger Racing. And I mean, after Road America, obviously, as I mentioned, the 9th round of the season, so essentially the midpoint, he was only actually outside the top 15, and there's 2 Iowa races where it went a bit messy, and Milwaukee as well, where I'm pretty sure he had issue. Did he have an engine issue?
Did a mechanic? Yeah, he had that fire, didn't he?
Yes. So, I mean, there were all 2 crashes and an engine issue. The races that he finished, he was in the top 15. He was in the top 10, 4 of the final 5 races as well. 8th, 6th in Toronto, Laguna Seca, Portland. So that was where the team really seemed to start coming into their own on road and street courses, as weirdly they struggled to do so more than the alien concept of ovals. So yeah, like I think what impressed me the most as the season went on as well, even if Ilott didn't qualify particularly well, like there were examples where he was qualifying down in the 20s, but racing his way up to the top 10. And I think that's a good reflection on him executing. And also the fact that the team really kind of, I think they eradicated a lot of the little issues in execution that they may have had earlier in the season, whether it's strategy or pit stops and just little things that were inevitably going to be teething problems. And they just, generally became a lot more competitive when it really mattered on race day. And I think Ilott did emerge as that leader that we kind of hoped and expected ahead of the season that he probably would be for that team.
Yeah, you mentioned the Road America. I think that was definitely sort of the breakthrough for Ilott and Prema, if that makes any sense. It was his first weekend where we saw him actually have some pace and show what we've seen in sort of his first year in IndyCar, which was obviously very very good. And then I don't know what it is with Ilott and Laguna Seca, but it just works every time he turns up there. He's quick, although he didn't do very well in qualifying throughout that whole race. He probably could have got a top 5 that race. Strategy at the end of the year, it sort of felt like it was sort of clicking with him and Prema.
Okay, I'd say Ilott definitely had a better year than Louis Foster. So
Yeah, I
I'd
agree.
put him above Louis Foster, maybe not above Hunter Ray, but we can put him.
I probably would put him with Hunter Ray.
Okay,
3 top 10s, I'd say. Well, was it 3 or 4?
4 top 10s.
Yeah, 4. Yeah.
Okay, we can put him above Hunter Ray in that case.
I mean, Hunter Ray's been screwed over by the fact he only did 1 race here. But...
Yeah. That's his fault. He chose that program. So, anyway, let's move on to Marcus Ericsson. James Scott, cover your ears. Archie, you can take us away.
That was so funny last week's episode. I teed James up to take the disappointment, and he just didn't mention Ericsson. But yeah, I mean, we spoke about him a lot last week in a lot of depth in the season review podcast, and he was my disappointment of the season. And it was just, I mean, it capped off a disastrous 2 years, and it was even more disastrous than a disastrous first year in many ways for Andretti. And it felt like it wouldn't get worse. It couldn't get worse than being 15th, obviously, after really joining the team as a picture of consistency. And in these 2 years, he's kind of become a picture of stark inconsistency. You know, before he joined Andretti, he was 6th in the championship 3 seasons on the bounce for Ganassi. He had 38 top 10 finishes in 50 races, 44 top 12 finishes in 50 races. He only managed 2 top 10s across the entirety of this season. Over half the races he finished outside the top 15. I mean, it's such a dramatic change in this super reliable driver that we saw at Ganassi into this just, I mean, he looks a shell of himself in these couple of years at Andretti. And okay, he's coming back next year and he's got what feels like one final chance to really prove himself ahead of what feels like it's going to be a pretty active driver market. But yeah, ends a career low 20th in the standings, his worst points tally in IndyCar to date. And that driver we used to know just seems to have really, really dissipated. And I mean, it's not for a lack of trying. Like, he spoke so much about the work he put in ahead of the season from a mental standpoint, a physical standpoint. Said he always gets better in the second year of the team. And we saw that when he was at Ganassi, but none of it happened here. He wasn't even close to his teammates and just seems to be stuck in a pretty big hole.
Yeah. I mean, he was throughout the entire season comfortably the slowest Andretti driver pretty much every weekend. He had, I think his highlight is probably the 500, even though getting disqualified, he was obviously challenging for the win. But even that was sort of more down to strategy than his own pace, for that matter. Because I feel like if he hadn't had that thing in his contract, I wouldn't be surprised if they just put Hauger in his seat and said, yeah, sorry, mate, can't be doing that. Because it has been genuinely, don't know where the pace has gone, because he's a completely different driver to the one that we saw race for Ganassi.
I mean, the start of the year, we were quite impressed with Ericsson because it felt like he'd made a bit of a step up in the first couple of rounds. There was a statistic, he was in the top 7 in every session for about 8 sessions in a row, whatever it was. We started the year pretty encouragingly. He had a good result in St. Pete, and then it just sort of went downhill from there again. Ended up with 2 Fast X appearances, but they were in Thermal and Long Beach right at the start of the year. It ended up with 7 appearances in the Fast 12 across the course of the year. His average qualifying was 13th, which isn't too bad. It's actually very similar to what Kirkwood's was. But execution on Sunday seemed to be the big issue. Obviously, he had 2 spins at Laguna Seca and a very similar one had one spin at Laguna Seca and a very similar one at the Thermal Club earlier on in the season, which lost him a lot of performance there. And as I said last week, the Indy 500, many people look at it as a positive. I actually think that only took away from Ericsson's season further because he had a prime opportunity to win that race and he lost it when he had the track position, the better car, and the better tyre and fuel situation. I mean, I'm not going to repeat what we said last week, but we thought last year couldn't have got any worse, but this year was even more catastrophic for Ericsson, and you wonder, how do you go into year 3 and changing? Because coming into this year, he had a mental reset. He had this new coach on board. He had the engineering reshuffle halfway through the year, and none of it really changed anything. So, what do you put it down to? There's no way. Ganassi, he's this ultra reliable top 10 finisher every week, and suddenly he's struggling to get a top 20 finish, and I think he ended up outside the top 20 more times than he ended inside the top 20 in the results this season. So it was a disastrous year in pretty much every single regard for Marcus Ericsson, and I think there's only one tier we can really justifiably put him in, considering his pedigree, which is going to be the F tier. I feel probably top is fair. He's probably had a better year than David DiFrancesco and Jacob Abel, but
I mean, he probably had a better year than Stingray Rob, but I don't know.
I feel, considering Ericsson's pedigree, and the fact he got one more top 10 than Rob,
the car,
this is where it gets tricky because you've kind of got to weigh it up against expectation. And I think compared to expectation, and if you say Dan, pedigree, ultra disappointing. F for me.
Okay, let's go on to Graham Rahal. We've got 4 drivers left in this episode. Graham Rahal, as I said. Evan, take us through Graham Rahal's 2025 season. Your thoughts?
I mean, it seems like another typical Graham Rahal season that's happened over the past sort of years. There's been a couple races where he seems incredibly quick. Like we got Indy's always, the Indy GP is always quite good for him. And then Portland was great, and Toronto was also all right. It's those sort of like 1 or 2 sort of street or road tracks where he does all right. And then the rest of the season, it's just terrible. And you literally can't see him staying because it's just obviously almost his team. But just the lack of pace, especially as we've already talked about on ovals, is just astonishing that, the race has started. 10 laps in, Rahal's getting lapped, first driver to get lapped, Graham Rahal. And it's just surprising because you wouldn't expect it considering some of the other results. But not a great season, I don't think.
I mean, I said how disappointed I was in Rahal overall last week and the team. And every year there's the engineering reset. Every year there's the new technical reshuffle. Every year there's something changes, but nothing changes on track. If anything, it seems to get worse. And I think Rahal has decreased in his finishing position every year in the standings since 2020. Which he qualified fairly well, which is a bit of a theme with the team, where qualifying actually seemed to be quite good. He ended up with 4 Fast 6 appearances throughout the year and 7 Fast 12 appearances, which isn't too bad by any means, but execution seems to continually be the issue. I mean, his overall results are pretty catastrophic. Again, 3 results in the top 10 for a driver of his experience, and he doesn't really seem to be leading that team forward much, especially when there's drivers chopping and changing alongside him each year. He should be the figurehead of that team getting the results, but he isn't on a regular enough basis, and the overperformance just remains a mystery. Why is it not changed in 3 years? They just seem devoid of pace, and he is genuinely inconvenienced a lot of the time when ovals the amount of time he is being lapped. So when is it going to change? I mean, what I will say to Graham Rahal, he's one of the only drivers seemingly on my spreadsheet who didn't get involved in an accident this year. And I don't think any race actually ended early, which is interesting, but just no pace on too many occasions, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it was only 4 years ago that he finished 7th in points, so it's been a pretty dramatic downturn and a gradual one over the last 4 years. Like, he hadn't been outside the top 10 in points since the 2014 season in 2021, but it's been a real downward spiral since then, and I think that's applicable to both him and the team. He's gone from 11th to 15th to 18th and now 19th in the standings. And he's still shown he's capable of the peaks, particularly on the road and street courses, with those multiple Fast 6s, those 3 top 7 results. Portland was obviously a really good weekend. Portland was a funny one because obviously they tended to have really good qualifying pace on the road courses, and actually didn't qualify too well and ended up racing really well, which kind of booked the trend for the year, as I mentioned earlier, with the team as a whole really, really struggling on race day. I mean, Rahal finished only over half the races outside the top 15. And the reality on ovals is he's the slowest of his teammates, and he's probably, along with Jacob Abel, was the slowest in the field. And we've used the moving chicane kind of description, which feels harsh, but it's kind of been the reality. And just why, like, there's so many questions like I want to know the answer to, because why has there not been the improvement with all the I know they made mistakes with personnel recruitments coming over from Europe, for instance, that did not have the oval pedigree and knowledge, but they've made enough kind of reshuffles and changes to hopefully fix that. So it's a bit of a mystery why they're still not getting better, no matter kind of the different personnel. And I'm happy to give time for the Jay Fry regime to kind of take force, because I know he arrived pretty late ahead of the season. But yeah, yet again, the only real thing we saw from Ray Hall, apart from the occasional reminder that he's not lost it, is that, yeah, it's just a bit of a regression. So, yeah, I'm just next year's got to be the year that these changes come and start seeing a bit of an upturn for that team.
Okay, where is he going? I feel bottom of C or top of D is my early preference for this one.
Yeah, I'd go top of D. Just looking at the peaks.
Yep, cool. I'm happy with that. So we've got 3 more to go. We'll go on to Connor Daly, who maybe is one of the most interesting drivers of anybody to discuss, because, as we know, sensational on ovals. But Road Street, again, as we said for Singer and Rob, has been a bit of a struggle on the package side of things. I think the most disappointing thing for Daly was that he was very strong on ovals, but it felt like they really struggled to convert into meaningful results. There was a lot of times IMS, Gateway, Iowa's, where he was really in contention for a podium in all of those races. And his best finish on an oval ended up being 5th in Nashville, the one where he started at the back effectively. And he really deserved better results than that because he drove very well, but execution, particularly towards the end of the races, really seemed to be a bit of a problem for whatever reason for Connor Daly. And looking at his qualifying results on ovals, obviously impressive. Road and street wise, not so impressive in 21st. And average finish wise, he was, I think, 9th in the ovals and ended up about 16th overall. An average finish of 16 overall, which isn't too bad, all things considered, but there just weren't many outstanding days at all on road and street courses. Again, I don't feel we saw Daly make too many errors at all at points across the year. And I feel like maybe the results weren't quite deserving, as I said, especially on the ovals, but I feel like it was an unmiraculous year, which is what we were sort of expecting, really, when Daly was announced for the full season with Hinkos.
Yeah, I think it was a respectable year of 2 parts because you kind of have to separate the ovals and the road and street courses. And if you kind of merge the two and look, okay, he finished 18th in points, that kind of feels like it's on a par with what you had from Ilott, from Grosjean, his predecessors at the team. And yeah, the reality was that he was generally nowhere on road and street courses, but you've got to think a lot of that's owing to the Hunkos package. I mean, he was in the top 15 3 times in non-oval races. Okay, maybe he's not quite at the standard of a Grosjean or an Ilott, but I think Daly with a decent package would still be able to record you some top 10 finishes on road and street courses. I think it's a bit of a myth that he's just an oval driver, as much as he is very much an oval specialist, because that was where he really excelled this year. I mean, he had joint fourth highest average finish on ovals.
Oh, full-timers.
From full-timers, because you will mention Takuma Sato. But yeah, I mean, he was exceptional on ovals. So there's no beating around the bush there. And he was very unlucky not to have a win. Like, pretty much every oval race he ran up front. But, as you mentioned with Nashville, no matter how he qualified, because his racecraft on ovals is among the very best in the field, top 3, top 5 for sure. And yeah, I can't help but feel he actually really did deserve more. He kept getting burned by yellows or kind of set back by just occasional pit stops that weren't bad stops, but in those pretty frenetic oval cycles would just drop him down 4 positions and he'd have to kind of redo the hard work that he'd already put in.
Or in some cases, Christian Rasmussen, but okay, continue.
But yeah, I would say genuinely, he's one of the best oval drivers in the modern era of IndyCar. And I just hope he can find a way to stay in the field in some capacity so he runs the oval races and gets the win that I feel like he genuinely deserves.
Yeah, I think it was... Juncos kind of got what you sort of expected from Connor Daly's box office on an oval. You don't see anyone else sort of going and making those highline moves, just sending it around the outside. And it's always amazing to watch. But then when we get to the road and street courses, again, it is disappointing, because really the only time we were really talking about Daly on a road and street course was when he got taken out by Christian Rasmussen, which is, I don't know, it's unfortunate because, yeah, Archie, you said about the Juncos car not being too great, which, yeah, it wasn't, but at the same time, neither of the drivers, I don't think, optimized the package. So I think Well, on road and street courses, that is. I think he definitely did on the ovals.
Okay, maybe one of the more difficult ones to rank is Connor Daly, because of the season of two very different performances. Where do we think he goes?
I mean,
I would put him top of C.
If you were ranking it just on the ovals, he'd be like top of B, almost in A. You'd have thought, but
Fine, we'll go top of C then. And we are progressively going up in points order. And it's points finish ahead of people like Rail and Ericsson and Nolan Siegel. Isn't too bad. And when you look at it like that. Okay, 2 more to go. Some we spoke about in depth last week was Kiffin Simpson. So Archie, just remind us of your thoughts on his year.
Yeah, I mean, just to summarise, I mean, he made a massive improvement this year. I think more so than anyone could have expected. His entry was 25th in points last year, which is the fairest kind of way to look at it, given all of the chopping and changing of drivers, particularly Dale Coyne racing that we saw between a few teams last year. So essentially, he's jumped 8 points up in the standings to 17th this year and scored 100 points more as well, which was pretty massive gains. He achieved one more top 10 this year with 6, and he managed top 15s in his rookie season with only 5. 3 times in the top 5, podium in Toronto. I feel like he really improved his racecraft, and also as well, like on a pure pace side of things, I think he made massive gains as well. I mean, in his rookie year, he had 3 starts better than 20th, and this year he had 12 starts 19th or better. So I think that's pretty solid stuff. Obviously, qualifying 3rd completely on merit in Mid-Ohio showed the peaks that this guy can be capable of. I know he's still got a way to go to match Dixon and Palou, but you can't expect that from a 20-year-old up against 2 of the best we've ever seen. And the reality is that he's made a bigger jump, as I say, than anyone really could have anticipated this year. And of course, he's a driver who brings money and brings funding to that team and probably can be there at Ganassi for as long as that funding remains kind of being pumped into the team. But I think this year was evidence that there's clear talent in there as well. And he jumped up to IndyCar probably prematurely with not masses of experience, but he's made a massive improvement, and the rate of development is genuinely really, really impressive. And yeah, only 20 years old. I think there's still lots of time to grow into what looks to be pretty encouraging potential, I would say.
It was quite an odd season. You can't really compare that team. I mean, how difficult must it be going up against 2 of the greatest IndyCar drivers of all time? It's obviously not going to be easy. But I feel like he's had really quite a promising season. I wouldn't say incredibly impressive, but really promising, and he has shown that he has got some pretty decent pace at times. I think. And especially some of his races, he just sort of appeared out of nowhere into quite a high finishing position. We saw that in the season finale. We didn't really talk about him all race, but then with 10 laps to go, he's fighting for a podium and didn't quite get it. But yeah, I mean, it's a promising season, I think. Someone, especially being so young.
I mean, there's a lot to take, isn't there? 5 Fast 12 appearances, including that run to 3rd in Mid-Ohio in qualifying, and he could have well taken a podium there if he didn't have a slight blunder in his final pit stop. Again, a race completely on merit, and those sort of results last year would have been unfathomable. Like I said, the podiums and the top 5s. As I said last year, as I said in previous episodes, you would have never imagined him to achieve those results 12 months ago, especially on an oval, which has been one of his really, really weak points. And Simpson's development has been so impressive, year 1 to year 2. Again, he's in a Ganassi, and he's still not at the standard of maybe what a Ganassi driver should be, but he's made such a significant step up in year 2 that he can be excused for that somewhat, and with the goal of making more progression next year. But I'm now at the stage where seeing him on the podium regularly next year, I feel like wouldn't be a surprise at all. Kiffin Simpson has really raised a lot of eyebrows this year at how he has improved so significantly. I mean, his average finish was 0.1 position behind Joseph Newgarden, for example. So huge amount of credit to Simpson. What a fantastic sophomore season compared to his rookie year. And I'm glad he has made the progress he has done because, again, very good friend of the show, and maybe does get some undeserved slack at times. So, well done, Kiffin Simpson. So if we look at the list, again, this is a hard one because it's how much you weigh expectation versus actual performance. Because expectation, you go in A, but performance maybe is not quite the same case. So I'd probably say top of C, in my opinion.
That would be my pick as well. God, we've not been controversial enough today, have we? We've not had any disputes.
Put Stingray in A now, please.
Okay, and let's end off the first part with Santino Ferrucci. So, Evan, you can take us away for the final one.
I feel like it was quite an odd year for Santino this year because at the start, he was running top 10 in points at one point, wasn't he? He had 2 podiums, I believe it was, with the Detroit, which was a brilliant weekend for him, and what's it called?
Road
America, yeah. We all saw the scenes of him chugging the beer at the end. That was probably one of my favourite moments of the season. We all know he's a bit hot-headed, but I feel like he was so promising in the first half of the season, and then throughout the second half, he sort of just started to become overshadowed by David Malukas quite heavily, and he sort of got lost a bit, I think, especially through, I think the weekend in Toronto really sort of set him back a bit, and not being able to race that weekend sort of, I don't know, it might have interrupted his rhythm or whatever, but he didn't really recover after it, I don't think, and he wasn't really the same driver that we saw beforehand, and comfortably slower than Malukas for most of the season, I think, which is quite disappointing from what was quite a good year last year.
We've spoken about this quite a lot, haven't we, Archie? That pre-season expectation that he set himself of he's going to challenge for a championship. But ever since that point, you leave yourself within a bit of a hole where if you're not performing at that level, you are going to be criticised for it. And there was a disastrous start to the year for him and Malukas. No top 10s until the Indy 500. And then, as we know, that Indy 500, he sort of had that 4-race run of consecutive top 5 finishes, including 2 podiums and completely different types of tracks and completely different styles of racing, where suddenly it looked like something had finally clicked. And that was the encouragement. That was the springboard for Ferrucci's season, seemingly. And then it wasn't. And then we head into after Road America. He finishes with 2 top 10s the rest of the year, crashes in Toronto in warm-up, crashes in Portland in the opening lap, crashes at Laguna Seca late on, which really wasn't the Santino Ferrucci that we once saw last year, who became ultra consistent, and 2, the Santino Ferrucci that we really expected. And his season is just really defined by those 4 races, which is disappointing. I think the other thing we regularly highlight for Ferrucci is just how poorly he qualifies. His average qualifying result was 18th with 2 top 12 finishes across the course of the year, which is just ultra disappointing for somebody of his standard. And he's given himself a lot more work to do on race days, and it just wasn't the ultra consistent Ferrucci that we were really hailing last year, who had taken AJ40 that step forward. And those 4 races really showed us what he's capable of, but we just didn't see it across the course of the season. And one of my favourite statistics is that if it wasn't for his points penalty in Detroit, he would have ended up with identical points to David Malukas for an issue which didn't give him any advantage in performance. So just an odd year, but I feel like you could only be disappointed with the amount of expectation that he placed himself and on the team in regards to the performance pre-season.
Yeah, I mean, I've described his year as cold to boiling to pretty freezing, because like when he was on in that mid-season phase, he was pretty seriously on. Like, that was an impressive stretch, and as you say, Dan, it was a bit of a breakthrough, obviously producing on road and street courses where we hadn't previously seen that sort of thing from him. Obviously, with that pair of podiums on a street course and then on a road course as well. Obviously, his previous best results all having come on ovals. Like, I don't think he had a top 5, did he, on road and street courses before that point, which was pretty impressive. But then either side of that hot streak, it was a slow start and a pretty disastrous end. And it took a while for Foyt to get going on both sides of the garage. And then, yeah, obviously kind of 500 onwards, things did seem to click into gear a bit more. it's quite funny actually that Malukas entered the season with one fewer top 10 finishes than Ferrucci, having probably looked the more comfortable and quicker of the Foyt drivers. I think that was mostly outlined in qualifying, where Malukas was very regularly at the very front and Ferrucci was pretty much the polar opposite. And I think that was particularly glaring on some of the ovals as well, which is obviously regarded as Ferrucci's strong point, but he was qualifying at the rear. And I thought he ended up with the same average finish on ovals as Daly, obviously joint fourth best. But I actually thought some of the oval races, we didn't quite see the fireworks we used to from Ferrucci. Just a bit of a scruffier year. Like you mentioned, the errors, of course, and just the consistency that we saw last season with the 11 top 10 finishes. He only had 2 top 10s in the final 8 races, which obviously includes the did not start at Toronto. But it's funny. Like if you look at it with the giving him back the points that were docked, and he finishes level with Malukas, 11th, 12th in points. You're looking at it as a better year, really. And if he doesn't miss Toronto, he's probably split top 10 in points. But again, it was his error that made him miss Toronto, so you can't really put it that way. I just thought it was a disappointing regression after what was a very impressive year in 24. Like, it wasn't a major regression, but it was just a very, very different season. It was particularly streaky, and so much for that title challenge.
Just curious, let's see what his points difference to last year. I mean, he got 367 points last year, and if you add the points he lost, he would have got 318, so a 50-point regression effectively. Not great. Anyway, to round off, again, a difficult one, but I'd probably say top of C.
Top of C, yeah. I mean,
I'd possibly put him behind Kiffin Simpson.
Yeah, I think I would agree, to be fair.
Okay.
I think you've got to think of the big hot streak, but at the same time, it was just he was so, like, either side, it was that slow start, and he was really off it at the end of the year in quite a dramatic way. So I wouldn't put him top of C.
Perfect. So that is part 1 of our driver tier list. We will be back for part 2 next week, where we're going to be doing the top 15 in points. And we'll see a lot more in the A's and B's. It's been a lot down the C's, D's and F's today. It'll be a bit more positive for episode 2 of this. But hope you've enjoyed it. We'll obviously keep you updated with the latest news. There might have been news just between us recording this episode dropping, and if there is major news, you'll of course have a bonus at some point during the week. But for part 1, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.